This is Zachary Alam, convicted of traveling from his Centerville, Virginia home during the attack on the Capitol, then assaulting police officers and smashing the same Speaker's lobby window Ashley Babbitt climbed through before she was shot and killed by law enforcement. At his sentencing in November, Alam was unapologetic, claiming his conviction was unjust. He demanded a full pardon.
Zachary.
An inmate at the Grayson County Jail.
Alam repeated the ultimatum in a phone interview with WUSA 9 from the Grayson County, Kentucky Detention Center. Do you believe other people who were convicted of January 6 crimes like you are in prison right now expecting pardons from Donald Trump once he takes office?
I'll let you know something right now. Not only are we expecting a pardon, we are demanding a pardon. We are demanding a pardon, okay?
Alam and other January 6 defendants have been emboldened by the second election of the man they stormed the Capitol to protect. President Donald Trump has repeatedly promised to pardon January 6 defendants convicted for their crimes.
Look at what's happened with the J6 hostages. The hostages, that's a horrible thing.
Most recently in a post-election interview with NBC News.
We're looking at it right now, most likely.
Well,
Those people have suffered long and hard.
The U.S. Constitution gives the president power to grant, quote, reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States. That means the president can either commute a prison sentence or pardon a person outright for any federal crime. And there is no limitations to that power except if the president is impeached.
I believe that by Donald Trump pardoning me, he's going to be pardoning good men. He's going to be pardoning good men that don't deserve to be here. He's going to be pardoning good men, right, that believed in their heart, right, that they was doing the right thing on January 6th.
Former U.S. Capitol Police Officer Aquilino Gonell has little sympathy.
I spent 25 years as a public servant.
Bloodied and bruised by rioters as he defended the Capitol.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. January 6th was a horrible day where I almost lost my life.
Gonell has testified at dozens of January 6 sentencings.
What message does it send if he does in fact pardon these people?
It normalizes the type of behavior. It makes it acceptable. But they are okay with that as long as they're the one doing the attacking.
According to DOJ data released this January on the 4-year anniversary of the attack, almost 1,600 people have been criminally charged. Roughly 600 of those have been charged with felonies for assaulting, resisting, or impeding law enforcement or obstructing those officers during a civil disorder. 180 have been charged with using or carrying a dangerous weapon in the Capitol or on the grounds around the Capitol. More than 150 have been charged with destruction of federal property or theft of federal property. The DOJ says it has decided against moving forward with cases against roughly 400 people whose only charges stemmed from illegally entering the grounds around the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. But defense attorneys like Anthony Sabatini, who's a former conservative state lawmaker in Florida, calls the DOJ's prosecution one of the most politically motivated of all time.
They went completely out of their way to tear this country apart politically. And the only way to correct for that is to wipe this chapter away with pardons. So yeah, we could sit here and debate, whether this guy, the grandma who was standing here with a flag over here, or this guy who threw a water bottle into the crowd had various levels of guilt. That's not what should premise these pardons. The pardon should be based on recompensing for the misbehavior of the DOJ in creating the first mass political partisan prosecution against Americans.
It's almost universally the case that a prosecutor who prosecuted a case doesn't support a pardon.
Former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Matthew Graves, oversaw prosecution of January 6 defendants until he stepped down from his post January 16th.
It can't be helpful to the people who will be left behind after you leave to see all their work undone.
So there is no such thing as undoing the work of January 6th. There is a robust public record that has been created. Because of the unprecedented, transparent nature of this prosecution, we've made every exhibit in the over 200 cases we've tried publicly available. So there will forever be a record of what happened on January 6th.
But it won't be a slight at all to the men and women of this office who brought those cases to see pardons handed out left and right?
So a pardon is a political act, and if one chooses to pardon anyone involved with January 6th, obviously the prosecutors here didn't think that a pardon or a non-prosecution was warranted. My point only is that there is accountability, and there will forever be a record of the events of that day.
Graves says around 1,100 defendants have already had their cases fully adjudicated and received sentences for their criminal activity on January 6th. And 700 of those have completed their jail or prison sentence or were never sentenced to time behind bars to begin with. The DOJ also says any defendants still serving time are at federal facilities because of the severity of their crimes.
How hard do you think it's going to be to draw a distinction between who gets a pardon and who doesn't?
I don't think it's going to be hard at all.
William Shipley has represented at least 90 January 6 defendants with another 45 to 50 clients with cases still pending.
These cases have video evidence. You can dial up the video and see exactly what it was, what the conduct was that the person was involved in. It's not a question of evaluating, the credibility of somebody's story about what somebody else did or didn't do. You have pretty clear documentary evidence of exactly what was done. Now, there are points of view about the events that are involved. Many January 6 defendants convicted of various kinds of offenses saying they were only reacting to things happening around them. They were acting in defense of others. So it does not strike me that a case-by-case analysis would take too very much time or be too difficult for people who knew what they were doing.
And Shipley says he expects President Trump won't just stop with pardons and instruct his Department of Justice to simply shut down all remaining January 6 cases and investigations altogether. The DOJ says 170 January 6 defendants are still awaiting sentencing, while another 300 haven't even gone to trial yet, with new arrests announced just this month.
If the Trump Justice Department wants to bring this entire episode to a close, that doesn't mean, following through and pursuing the cases that have already been filed. It means bringing the episode to a close.
Already, 2 federal judges have ruled in favor of delaying January 6 trials until there's more clarity about President Trump's plans for pardons and additional prosecutions. WUSA 9 digital investigative reporter Jordan Fisher.
Because even though the courts are supposed to shut out what's going on in the outside world, they are very aware of what Donald Trump has suggested he will do.
Right, and the majority of judges have declined to alter their court schedule based on what the president-elect has said he's going to do or what a new attorney general might do. But several judges have struggled with that. They have wanted more assurances than the current U.S. Attorney's Office could provide.
What do you think is going to happen over these next weeks and months?
Yeah, that's a great question. Attorneys are always asking me that. I'm asking attorneys that. We've sought clarity from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They don't seem to know either. Judges would love to know. I think it's a big question that's up in the air, and a lot of it is going to come down to, does President-elect Trump follow through on his promise on day one to issue pardons? And what does that look like? Is that a blanket pardon for everyone involved? Is that a pardon for misdemeanors? Is that a pardon for people who are not charged with violence?
And it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Northern Virginia's Zachary Alam expects to be among those set free. And what will you do when you are released from prison?
Well, that's just for me to know and you to find out.
Eric Flack, WUSA 9.
Now, just hours ago, now former President Biden pardoned several members of Congress who sat on the January 6th committee. He also pardoned several officers who testified about the attack on the U.S. Capitol. Those pardons were part of a final wave of clemency actions by Biden. He says they were to protect those that he believed could face retribution from the Trump administration. One of the officers who received a pardon released a statement, and this is former Capitol Police Officer Sergeant Aquilina Gonell, who said, in part, "I was just doing my job, fulfilling my oath to defend this country. American citizens attacked the U.S. Capitol, injuring me and my colleagues. We protected all elected officials, regardless of their political party." Now, other U.S. presidents have done similar mass pardons. They are rare, but they are definitely precedented. So let's bring in Chief Investigator Eric Flack to talk a bit more about this. And Flack, somebody else that you've talked to is Officer Harry Dunn, and I was texting with him earlier today, and he said he learned about these preemptive pardons from us in the media, that he hadn't anticipated it. He was surprised by it, but he was grateful for it because given the climate, his concerns were similar to the concerns of now outgoing President Biden.
Yeah, that's right, Les. And I mean, I think that's kind of a different issue than the January 6 pardons, right? I mean, I think President Biden was pardoning a number of individuals who were potentially going to be in the crosshairs of now President Donald Trump for actions they took in relation to January 6. President Trump, of course, has indicated he does plan now on his first day in office to potentially issue pardons for those who have been convicted of crimes for January 6th. The real question there is whether or not he pardons people who are convicted of nonviolent crimes, which is something he has indicated he will in fact do, and then whether or not there are any pardons that are extended to people who are convicted of violent crimes for their actions on January 6th. There's a possible distinction there that's being reported, that there could be pardons for nonviolent offenders, and then President Trump could commute the sentences of people serving time currently in prison for their crimes on January 6th and potentially for violent crimes. We do know that there are some groups who have taken on advocacy on behalf of those who have been in prison for their crimes on January 6th, calling those prosecutions politically motivated, and that some of those groups hearing about the pardons from President Trump have now gathered at the D.C. jail, where we hear from the Department of Justice approximately 8 January 6 defendants are still in prison there at the D.C. jail, many of those because their crimes were deemed so serious. And these groups are now waiting outside the D.C. jail for potential releases that we think we don't really know, but could potentially come any moment, any hour. And so as those groups continue to gather for what in their eyes is really a celebratory moment, a moment of vindication for an issue they say was politicized for those who did in fact storm the Capitol on January 6th and then ultimately were held accountable in a court of law for those crimes. So obviously this is a very fluid situation with President Trump indicating he plans to take action on this really sooner rather than later, guys.
Yeah, we heard the president talking last night there at his rally at Capital One Arena, calling them the January 6th hostages. He said everyone in that room is going to be happy with what he's going to do in regards to these hostages, as he calls them, today. We know we're still waiting for the now president to make his way there to Capital One Arena now. But Flack, are people really talking about this there? Is this an issue to the average American right now? Are they anticipating and waiting eagerly for these pardons?
Yeah, I think the January 6th pardon issue is a huge deal for the people who made the trek across the country and in some cases from outside the country to Washington, D.C. to really celebrate Donald Trump's return to the White House. I think it is one of those flashpoint issues where many of the people who felt like this was a politicized them versus us situation feel like that President Trump taking the White House again and symbolically, literally freeing people who have been convicted of crimes and imprisoned for their actions on January 6th are kind of freeing his supporters. This is a moment of victory, as President Trump has said. It is a moment of victory for the people who are here celebrating President Trump's return to the White House. And I think in many ways the people here see the January 6th issue and Donald Trump kind of undoing in many ways what was done
through the justice system to those who stormed the Capitol on January 6th is a sign and a sense of pride. So I think, really, we've got a lot of, people down here, as you would normally have down in this part of town with an event like this. But really, it is a sign that they've won. Won this issue, and you heard Matthew Graves, who's the outgoing Department of Justice U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, saying, they can't undo what my office did, and that there will always be a record of this, and kind of pointing to the fact that this is on the record means that that's something that Donald Trump, President Donald Trump and his pardons can really never take away, is something that the prosecutors are now holding on to. But certainly, the people here see this as a victory for them, that Donald Trump is able to kind of undo, at least from a judicial standpoint, some of the prosecutions that happened with January 6th. Guys?
I wanted to touch on something because you said, the overwhelming sentiment is that they won, and my brain went to retribution. So I recall interviewing one of the women who stormed the Capitol in Texas. She lost her livelihood. She was working in law enforcement, and she was prosecuted. And I'm wondering if next, assuming there are blanket pardons of some kind, we could be seeing lawsuits that ensue en masse afterward.
Yeah, I mean, and all of that would be ultimately end up in a court of law. And I think, Simone, what is so interesting about this is nobody really knows what's next. This is truly uncharted territory. Again, we're still unclear about what these pardons are going to look like. We had, as part of this broadcast, President Trump, signing executive orders and executive actions earlier in a symbolic ceremony from the Oval Office. Those were not the type of actions that we're talking about. So again, officially, I don't think that we have any indication that these pardons have even officially taken place, even though it has been indicated that they are coming. And could he do it in a symbolic manner, gesture during the inauguration ceremony, parade ceremony that's going to happen behind me at Capitol One later on this afternoon? I think anything is possible. I think once, though, that first step happens where people are in fact pardoned for their crime. And again, there are various judicial differences and legal interpretations of what a pardon means. Does it mean the crime never happened, or does it kind of mean that you're excused for the crime? And then when you're talking about commuting a sentence for those who potentially committed violent acts on January 6th, well, that's not a pardon. That's saying when you commute a sentence, that means you've served your time. You have served enough time. You have paid your price for this crime, and you are now set free. And those happen immediately. You get processed and you walk out of jail. So, so much still to be seen with this, and obviously we're all going to be watching it closely, as many of the people downhill here will be as well. Guys, back to you.